Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Julia Doloff, and I'm a member of the UCSC Alumni Council and one of your Slugs and Steins volunteer organizers. With me is Kelsey Knox, also a member of the Alumni Council and another volunteer organizer. On behalf of the UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association, I'd like to welcome you to our monthly speaker series, Slugs and Steins Lectures from UC Santa Cruz. Before we get started this evening, I will read UCSC's land acknowledgement. The land on which UC Santa Cruz sits is the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi tribe. The Ama Mutsun tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. As most of you know, our Slugs and Steins series usually engages a UC Santa Cruz faculty member. However, tonight's Slugs and Steins will be a little different. Tonight we have a fellow alumnus, Richard Mahon, here to close out 2025 by guiding us in reflecting on our collective time attending UCSC over the past 60 years. But before we introduce our speaker and what we will be doing tonight, we'd like to know where you're joining us from this evening, who you're watching with, and when you graduated. So please take a moment to fill out a short poll that will soon pop up on your screen. Once it looks like a majority of the results are in, we will go ahead and share them out. And we do have a couple of fun new questions for you tonight too. So let us know which college you're from or affiliated with, and if you're a transfer student as well. So it looks like a majority of you filled that out. A lot of you watching on your own, kind of from all over California and other regions in the US. A lot of 80s and 90s grads, Cowell Stevenson, and not a lot of transfer students, but some. Thank you for taking that poll. So to get us started on reflecting on our experience attending UCSC, if you would, using the chat box, we would like you to please share what your strongest affiliation was when you were a student on campus. So maybe it was your affiliation with your college, maybe it was with a particular faculty member, maybe a specific location on campus, your major, a student group, or a sports team. We want to know what area of UCSC you were most connected to. So please take a moment to let us know by using the chat feature, and then we'll report out some responses. Awesome. So some majors and departments, a lot of Cowell College, Porter College, KZSC, a lot of psychology students. Amazing. Well, while you're sharing, I will keep going. So as mentioned, tonight we are pleased to welcome Richard Mahon. Richard is a History of Consciousness alumni. He previously lectured at Stevenson College and has taught sections of the Cowell core course. He currently teaches at a community college in Santa Maria, serves on the UCSC Alumni Council, and is the current chair of the Page and Eloise Smith Scholastic Society Board. In tonight's Slugs and Steins, Richard will have all of us reflect on how our experience studying at UC Santa Cruz helped shape and mold our lives. Richard will open by discussing the varying experiences of UCSC students from his perspective as a former student and instructor at UCSC and as a parent of a UCSC graduate. He will incorporate lessons about how family and education are crucial determinants of a person's life. And he will invite all of you to share what UCSC means to you. So please be prepared to share your thoughts and experiences if you wish. If you haven't yet figured it out, you all have the ability to turn on your cameras if you would like to. You will also have the ability to unmute yourselves to share your reflections with everyone here tonight. So the way that is going to work is that to share your reflections aloud, we will be using the raise your hand function when prompted. You may also share your reflections and/or any questions you have using the chat if you do not wish to speak aloud. If you do choose to share your stories, please be mindful of everyone's time and keep your reflections succinct. Richard will also go through these instructions before he opens up this Slugs and Steins for our reflective conversation. So with that, I hope that all of you have your Steins because I've got your slug, Richard Mahon.
So thank you, Julia. And oh my gosh, thank you to all of you many banana slugs who've joined us for the evening. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to show some images, and then hopefully pretty quickly, I'm hoping that we will transition to some conversation. So the wonderful Julia who just saw a moment ago emailed me earlier in the year to say the faculty person who was going to be with us ended up not being available. Richard, is there a possibility we could slide you in? And having been to a number of Slugs and Steins, I knew that what I would want to do is not what faculty typically do, which is talk about the research, but instead talk to you. Um, and so Julia said, that sounds like an interesting idea. Let's see if we can make that happen. And here in December, we're making it happen. It's going to sound for a minute like I'm indulging talking about me, which partly I'm doing. But as I describe my UCSC background, I hope what each of you will do is think about what the comparable element, detail, factoid is for your background. So, one of the reasons I thought I would enjoy, and other people might enjoy me leading this conversation, is that I consider myself incredibly lucky to have had connections to UCSC in 5 different decades. I came to Cowell College as a junior transfer in 1973. I was a double major in history and religious studies. I mention that partly because history students then had to do an oral exam, and my two oral examiners, John Beecher and Gary Miles, are both alive and well in Santa Cruz. And I actually have lunch with Gary a couple of times a year, and that's always a great joy. Most of us come as undergraduates, finish our work and move on. But I came back in the 80s to be the residential preceptor in Adams House at Cowell and a HisCon graduate student. So I thought I had I don't know what the right metaphor is, a second swing at the ball. And all the people I knew from my undergraduate experience, those friendships were added to by people who I met in those roles, grad student and residential preceptor. Okay, I finished graduate school. You would think, well, he'll leave and go away now. But Santa Cruz, as you all know, is wonderful. And I determined I was not going to leave Santa Cruz unless I had a tenure track job. So I spent most of the 90s at Stevenson as academic preceptor and teaching in the Stevenson core course, which in that era was a fall, winter, spring core course. And so there were a whole sort of third generation of banana slugs that I got to meet and support and hang out with and have class with, and a third generation of relationships. Then I really did leave. I got a tenure track job in Southern California at a community college, which was my goal. And for most of the aughts, I was in Santa Cruz not very often. But then my oldest son decided he wanted to be a banana slug. So between 2010 and 2015, I got to come back, in this case to Stevenson, to drop him off, pick him up for breaks and whatnot. So I got to see the campus a fourth time. You would think, okay, that's plenty. You should be gone now. But in 2021, I retired from my community college career, at least I retired from full-time status, and immediately wanted to see if there was a way for me to come back and teach in a core course. So starting in fall 2021, I've been teaching in the Cal core course 3 of the last 5 years. I've gotten involved with the Alumni Council, and I have found myself on the board of the Smith Society. All of those things I will say something a little bit more about in a moment, but now I'm going to show you some slides. And if our practice of the technology was right, I think I can make this work by telling it I want to share my screen and go to this place. And then, Julia, are you seeing the slides?
No, not yet.
Okay, so let me figure out what I'm doing wrong. If I click on that, oh, and then I click share. That's what I have to do. Share.
Yep.
Desktop 2, share. Now slides.
Yes, I can see your slides. I think you just need to click play.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start the slideshow, play from start, and I want to move through these relatively quickly. Um, and again, what I'm hoping is that you will not be concerned very much with my UCSC experience. you will be asking yourself, what would the comparable element have been for me? What did UCSC mean in my transition from late adolescence into early adulthood? So, UCSC, 60 years on. I don't know when I learned about this short story in the New Yorker magazine, but it was one of the very early things that I read that shaped my understanding of what going off to college is like. The Potato Baron and the Line is about a UCSC student who I think almost everybody on this webinar would recognize. It is all the foibles of living on campus, living off campus. Am I still involved with my girlfriend, boyfriend, or am I not? What's my job? Am I caught up in my classes? And I'm almost sure I read this before I got to Santa Cruz, and it began to shape my sense of what it would be like to be a student at a residential college at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Um, I can find and have access to the story. I'm not sure if that's because I'm a New Yorker subscriber or not, but I have a PDF of it, and anybody who wishes that they could read it and can't find it on a Google search, email me, and I will be happy to send it to you. I will say this again, I'm pretty sure, but my email address is rdmahon, M-A-H-O-N, at ucsc.edu. Another thing I read about Santa Cruz very early on is Solomon's House, A Self-Conscious History of Cowell College. And Cowell has a kind of a primacy of place in the UCSC world, not because it's better, but because it was first. And so many things that were already established when Stevenson and Crown and the other colleges came online were there because Cowell had established them. What's especially fascinating in reading Solomon's House is that not all of the things that many of us take for granted were part of the vision that Clark Kerr and Dean McHenry had for the campus, and certainly weren't anything that the regents were happy about until they were told, "Will you let us do this?" It's a wonderful read. Um, I hope in the next couple of days to get this posted on the Internet Archive. There do not seem to be copyright issues. And so, again, if you would like to get access to it, send me an email. And once it's posted, I'll let you know. Jeff Arnett edited this quirky and charming book in, I think, 1998, An Unnatural History of UCSC. It is not very much about the colleges or classes or departments, and a great deal about obscure places on the campus, especially the upper campus. And currently, it's on sale for $5 if you go to Bay Tree Bookstore's online website, and it's a wonderful read. In the Ecotone is a collection of photographs with text by Jim Clifford. Jim Clifford is now retired, but was a professor in my graduate program, History of Consciousness. Once again, the photographs are lovely, especially for people who live distant from the campus. This is something I think you would um, put on your coffee table and very much enjoy looking at. In the mid-teens, Bill Dickinson and Stephen Marino published this volume, Remembrance of a Dream. Bill Dickinson was a member of the founding class. He came as a junior transfer in 1965. He claims, I think plausibly, that he was literally the first student on campus because he showed up a couple of weeks before the campus opened and started finding his way around. Um, Stephen Marino is a Cowell alum from the 1980s who is a deeply passionate, avid photographer. And this next volume at UCSC, at UC Santa Cruz, Photographs by Stephen Marino, is one of two volumes he has published that is chock full of UCSC at day, at night, in winter, in spring, and summer. It's really lovely. I think for somebody who's interested in the history of UCSC, the kind of gold standard is Seeds of Something Different. This is the cover of volume one, but there are two volumes. The two of them together run to something like 890 pages, I want to say. But the terrific thing is that they are available as a downloadable PDF. So you don't have to pay anything. And you can read the chapters in any order. You can read about themes that you're particularly interested in. It's terrific. a lot of the content of Seeds of Something Different is drawn from the institutional oral history of UCSC. And most people here tonight will have had a class or an experience of at least one or two faculty who have oral histories in this archive. I should mention that at the end, I will put the PowerPoint into chat if it will let me. And institutional oral history is a link. And if you click on the link, it will take you to the web page where the oral histories are archived. I had the great good luck to find myself in special collections last week, partly having a conversation with Kelsey about whether or not Special Collections has an online edition of Solomon's House. We don't, and Kelsey guided me as to how I might put it in the Internet Archive. But I was quite struck by this architectural model. And I had heard for many years that Cowell, as originally designed, had a women's quad, although here in the architectural rendering, you see it's the women's residence court and the men's residence court, and that the women lived with women in their rooms, on their hall, in their dorm, but really even in their quad. That did not last very long, as people who were there from the very beginning, which I was not, will remember. But it was kind of lovely to find this model um, to confirm that story that I had heard, and now there's actually even evidence. So once again, I said, as I go through these images, I hope people are thinking about their UCSC, and I would love at some point to know how many of you still have a catalog. Um, Really, the first question is how many of you came to Santa Cruz when there still were printed catalogs? They kind of went away in the early teens. So I'm guessing a lot of people here could have had one, and it would be interesting for you to get it out of that box in the attic and just kind of see what's there. When people were introducing themselves and answering Julia's question about what you resonate with, I caught only a glimpse of at least one person for whom that glimpse was KZSC. And so that person, I'm guessing, is happy to see this image because UCSC is like an important part of their Santa Cruz memories. Um, I'm going to pause and say that if I go back and we think about the catalog, in theory, your primary memories of a university ought to be the classes that you took, what you learned, the degree you completed, and where that allowed you to go. And I hope for everybody that's part of your inventory of memories. But I think most students at some point have a part-time job on campus, off campus, and some of your memories are of people who you met not in a class, but in a work environment. And so when I was looking for slides, I came across this slide of somebody who has been a dear friend now for 50 years. And I texted her and her husband together to say, could I use this picture? And her husband immediately agreed and said he was sure she would be okay with it. I hadn't heard back from her. And so today I emailed or I texted her and she was okay with it. I and she worked in the Cowell Stevenson dish room. And at the time, I was convinced it was the best job I would ever have. And part of me thinks it's still true. And what I loved about the job was I worked with some of the most interesting and smart people who I'd ever met and people who I would not have met in a class because they were biology majors and anthro majors and all kinds of different majors, and they were fascinating. And the great thing about working in the dish room is it required almost no intelligence or consciousness. So the people who you were working with, you could get to know during your work shift, and it was pretty amazing. So I said that in the 1980s, I came back to Santa Cruz as a residential preceptor and graduate student, and I had the great joy and pleasure of being the preceptor in Adams House for 3 years. For people who are Cowell aficionados, Adams House is longer than any other Cowell dorm. On a floor without a lounge, there are 5 doubles on the floor. All of the other Cal dorms have 4 doubles on a floor with no lounge or preceptor's apartment. And if you actually look at the Cowell dorms, no two of them are alike. And in some ways, that's a great metaphor for the dorms more broadly because dorms are the people who live in them. Your roommates, hallmates, that crazy person who played Black Sabbath at concert volume at 7 a.m. Um, and I'm sure for people who lived on campus, some of your most precious memories are things connected to residential life. This next slide, I have to thank Rory for. He brought it a year ago to an Adams House reunion, and it's quite sobering because if you look at it, you will see what it cost to be a student in the 1980-81 academic year. There are lots of websites where you can plug a dollar amount into a year and ask what inflation would cause that cost to have appreciated to. If you do that for UCSC fees, you will see that they have accelerated dramatically faster than the rate of inflation. All right, so students that we live with, students that we work with, students that we take classes with are a major part of our UCSC banana slug memories. But I was stunned by the fact that when I came to Santa Cruz, there were cows living on campus. And you could walk from Cowell down through the East Remote parking lot and into the meadow where the cows were very curious about who you were and what you were doing. They would come up and sniff you and want to know if you had anything for them to eat. And when it was clear you didn't, they got bored and went on their way very quickly. And at some point in the 80s, somebody must have been remembering that and brought this paper mache cow to the East Meadow. And I was struck by the time at the way it's kind of, I don't know, demonstrated the whimsy of the place by bringing a cow back to life. And so I thought this picture was worth having. So most college graduations have moved out of the colleges because already by the 80s, it was pretty difficult to get the graduates, the faculty, and the family and friends into the space of the college. Lots of things are determined on campus these days by risk management. I was told, I don't know if it's true or not, but I was told that over the last couple of years, the lower branches on redwood trees have been trimmed so that students will not think it's a good idea to climb up redwood trees, get 50 feet in the air, and fall off and injure themselves. I think I must have been having similar thoughts about the number of students on the roof of Cowell Classroom 131, who you see across um, the courtyard. But I have to say, I'm on the roof too, taking the picture. So I certainly don't mean this as um, anything that's judgmental. A number of my slides are Cowell slides, but of course there are 10 colleges, and um, I imagine there are some people on this call who only are familiar with Porter College, Benjamin F. Porter College. But people who have a long memory of Santa Cruz know that before there was a Porter College, there was a College 5. And I took this picture last summer at Return to the Redwoods because I was charmed by the fact that the memory of that identity of the college is captured on the backside. Hopefully all of your memories of UCSC are fond memories, although it's probably delusional to say that. No one's life is happy all the time. And depending on when you lived in Santa Cruz, it's quite likely that there was one natural disaster or another that you lived through. Most recently, that would be the CZU fire. But in January of 1982, parts of Santa Cruz County got over 20 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And the San Lorenzo River looked more like the Nile or the Amazon, and whole redwood trees came streaming down the river because of the volume of water that was rushing out of the river, and enough trees got trapped behind the Soquel Street Bridge that, as you can see, um, the bridge collapsed because the trees simply destroyed the supports that were holding it up. And once I'm showing this, I'm sure that a lot of you are thinking of an even more impressive natural disaster that came a little after 5 o'clock on October 17th in 1989. And I'm guessing because it's still there that most of you can picture where this image was taken because the Del Mar Theater you can see there in the background. I'm guessing this must have been the Ford's department store that was pretty effectively destroyed in the Loma Prieta earthquake. So I mentioned that I came back um, to Santa Cruz a third time in the 90s to be academic preceptor and um, to teach in the Stevenson core course. It was also the case in the early 90s that I got married and then relatively quickly had a son. And at some point, I was in one of the Stevenson quads, I think lower quad, when a Stevenson student, and I say with great embarrassment, I've forgotten his name. I know that it was a his, took this picture of me looking somewhat younger with my son. I asked him yesterday if he objected to being in the slideshow, and he was pretty clear he didn't want to be there here. And I said, if I don't mention your name, are you okay with it? He says, well, yeah, if you don't mention my name, I don't care. So here he is at Stevenson in the early mid 90s. And here he is again at Stevenson with former Chancellor George Blumenthal on the right and Stevenson core course instructor Kiva Silver about to hood him. And that makes kind of the transition from Santa Cruz's past to Santa Cruz in the present. One of Cowell's various former preceptors, excuse me, former provosts is Bill Lagisaw. And when Bill learned that I was going to be coming back to teach in the um, Cowell Court course in 2021, he sent me an email with this quote from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And when I was putting this together, I thought of this saying because part of me does have to say, well, being in Santa Cruz again in the 2020s, half a century after I got there, is kind of constantly schizophrenic because the place looks, I mean, there are parts of the college and the campus I could walk around almost blindfolded because they are so familiar. And yet, in many ways, the campus is very different from the ones that people remember from their various memories. So, some reflections on what has changed. So, when I lived in Adam's house, this lovely, lovely mural was not there. And there are murals all over campus now. Um, when this one was added, I don't know, but it's a terrific image and I suppose symptomatic of how something which looks very similar, Adam's house, can also look very different, the addition of the mural. Because I spent so much time at Stevenson in the 90s, at some point I was there and found this wall of Stevenson provosts past. They're all provosts past. Alice Yang is there in the bottom. The current Cowell Stevenson provost is Matt O'Hara, and his picture hadn't been added yet at this point. In some ways, I think one of the things that all of you would see and say, oh, that's the Santa Cruz I know, is the various kinds of music, political gathering. I mean, posters of every imaginable description, which are all over the campus. And this one caught my eye, and I took a picture, and so here it is. Here's another iconic West Side image, and I'm thinking of somebody who I'm pretty sure is here, who was, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, mildly outraged when she saw that what she and I knew as the flying IUD is now identified on campus maps as the Porter Squiggle. I like flying IUD better. And if you actually look at some maps, there's a third name for it, the Porter Wave. Um, but again, anybody who's been to Santa Cruz, I can't imagine this isn't a site that you recognize. A change from Santa Cruz's past is I'm guessing almost everybody will remember deer. Lots of people will remember skunks. But when I came back in the 2020s, a bunch of these guys had moved in. And as you can see, they are turkeys. And they march around the campus like they own the place. Um, if they were a little smarter or a little bit more brazen, they would literally, I think, shake you down to see what they could get from you. Um, but mostly because they're hungry, they ignore you and look for something to eat. Not only is the campus different, but the city of Santa Cruz is, from many angles of view, exactly what you would remember, and from other angles of view, incredibly different. I think all of you know, as a Cowell friend, I'm remembering said at an Adams House reunion a couple of years ago, what's the one bit of advice you would have given to yourself 50, 40 or 50 years ago? And the answer is buy real estate. Because as you know, it has appreciated dramatically. There's not a lot of open land for building, and so Santa Cruz is now building up, not without some controversy, but at least there's an attempt to build places for people to live. I've mentioned a couple of times return to the redwoods. I'm hoping that many of you gone. I know that many of you have gone because I've seen some of the people who are here. These are the dates. Excuse me. These are the dates for next summer. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, August 14th and 16th. A simple Google search will get you to it. It would be lovely if you came to Return to the Redwoods, but the nice thing about Return to the Redwoods is you can also use it as a kind of organizing vehicle to get people who you miss and would love to see together. And so a couple of years ago, Felice and Jamie, who'd been talking for a while about an Adams House reunion, finally stopped talking about it and began organizing it. So for the last couple of years, um, a group of people who all lived in that dorm in the early 80s have convened. And again, my theme is most of you are not Adams alumni, but most of you, I hope, have friendships that you've maintained over the years. And Return to the Redwoods is a great way to get people back together and reminisce, catch up, allow friendships to reblossom. Just a couple more slides. When people talk about UCSC, the obvious thing that they say is it is a beautiful campus, unlike any other. Um, and I think all of our memories will confirm that to be the case. And um, here's one image. If people think they know where it is, I will be curious if they can identify it. Um, it's a little obscure. Um, this is a much more familiar vista. This is just below the outlet to Pogonip, so that's Pogonip Land, Santa Cruz. You can see the wharf, the Dream Inn, the Monterey Bay, and on my version of the picture, you can even see the hills behind Monterey in the distance. I'm going to make a couple of shameless plugs. I mentioned that in coming back to the campus, I've gotten involved with the Page and Eloise Smith Scholastic Society. Um, the Smith Society was established by Bill Dickinson in 1999. Bill, I said earlier, came in 1965, and when he came, he was a former foster youth and ward of the court. And Bill established the Smith Society to provide support to current UCSC students who do not have family support networks to um, support them in their time at Santa Cruz. So I urge everybody to find some UCSC thing that they acquaint themselves with in more detail and to support it. And by support it, I don't mean necessarily sending money, although that's welcome because the money you send becomes scholarships for Smith students. Um, but the Smith Society tries to pair students with internships to link them to graduates in a field that they want to pursue. So learn about the Smith Society and learn how you can support current students in the future. And then an even more shameless plug. Um, as I said, I'm on the Alumni Council, and the Alumni Council organizes events in, and we use this word, in markets. And by market, we mean things like the LA Basin or Sacramento or the Bay Area. Sadly, I do not live in a market. I live in the Central Coast. But It turns out that there are enough banana slugs in the Central Coast to be willing to meet. And so on Sunday, December 14th, a week from Sunday, no, next Sunday, let's get this right. At 1 o'clock, a group of us are going to meet at the Solvang Brewing Company. So if your calendar is free and you live anywhere from Ventura to Paso, please come join us. This last slide I want to use as a transition for the questions I would love to hear our reflections on. So I've mentioned a couple of times that I came to Santa Cruz as a transfer student. Um, and one of the reasons I resonate with the Smith Society is that I was raised by my great aunt and great uncle, and they both died right after I turned 18. So by the time I got to campus, I didn't have any family support network. And it was community college that got me into Santa Cruz in the first place. And a large part of my sense of how I pay Santa Cruz back for what I feel was a life-changing experience is teaching community colleges and try and persuade students who have not thought about their potential, the potential of higher education to change their lives. I try and get them to think about that. This is a list of books from which students in the English composition class I taught this last semester read chapters. Some of you are looking at the list and says, "Oh my God, that's an incredibly long list for one semester," but it was one chapter from each book. So it was one or two chapters a week, manageable reading, etc. But I want to use this slide, and I turn off the slides in a moment, but I want people to be able to look at the list of text to ask a couple of questions to guide our conversation. And in a moment, I really am going to be true to my claim to stop talking. So universities are not new. The oldest universities are over a millennia old, but the UCSC that we all know is possible or became possible really only because of the GI Bill and Sputnik. The GI Bill said if you fought to defend your country in the Second World War, we want to make it affordable for you to go to college. And in 1958, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, suddenly American policymakers said, we need to catch up. And to do that, we need STEM education for every young American. Um, and in the master plan for higher education, community colleges are one of the leading pipelines to get students from their communities into the University of California. So let me ask two or three or four questions and hope that some of these will resonate. So the first obvious one is, and Julia said this one before, how would your life have been different if you had not gone to Santa Cruz, or the better version, um, how did Santa Cruz transform you in a way that you look back on and say, I am so glad that I had that experience? And it doesn't have to be academic. It could be the person you married, or that you married and divorced, or that you married and divorced and remarried, or anything about, you learned to surf, or I'm quite fond of the musician Jillian Welch, and she came to Santa Cruz and was in a bunch of bands. And it's not obvious that her academic study led her to be the really terrific musician that she is today. But the other question I want to have people think about and hopefully talk about is um, it seems fairly clear that the current administration in Washington wants to dramatically change what we have come to think American higher education looks like. The eviscerating of the federal dollars that support research is one of those things. The war on DEI is another one of its priorities. And if you glance over this reading list, I hope you will think that I am not running away from DEI and wanting to have a reading list that many students can see themselves in. So, where do you see your life going now in terms of repaying back to your kids, your nieces and nephews, your neighbors, trying to keep the promise of higher education alive for young Californians or people in other parts of the country if you live outside of California? And now I'm going to stop share and return the screen to you all. and you can unmute, and Julia and Kelsey and I will try and keep the conversation coherent. And as Julia said, there are a bunch of you. There are 72, according to my little participants window. So be succinct, and if various people, if we get to the point where everybody that wants to speak has had a chance to say something, you can come back again.
Perfect. So our first speaker is going to be Donna. Donna, please feel free.
Hi, everybody. Richard, it's as if you had ESP and teed up what I wanted to say, which, as much as I would like to walk down memory lane of my years at UCSC, which were so formative and really intellectually nourishing and really thrilling, I want to share something else with you. As Richard just pointed to, we're all aware that the Trump administration has higher ed in its sights, and specifically the UC system. I've been starting a new campaign called UC Unbowed with a bunch of people in the East Bay. There's a link to our petition that is calling on UC leadership to reject the control the federal government is trying to exert over what's researched and taught, who can teach and learn, and what people can say publicly. I hope you'll take a look at the petition and sign it and join our effort. I presented it to the regents a couple weeks ago when we had 3,000 signatures. We're going to share it with Governor Newsom this week. We're at almost 5,000. So I hope some of you will push us over that number. And thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for sharing.
Okay, we're moving on to Lisa.
Here I am. And hello, Richard. It's not actually been that long. I was incredibly fortunate. And I attribute a lot of my fortune to just being young. I say I was young and stupid. I was 17 when I came to Santa Cruz. I did not know what I was doing. I did not know. People ask why I came to Santa Cruz, and I came there because it was the hardest UC campus to get into. And I thought that had some cachet to it. I also grew up in the Bay Area, and my dad taught at Berkeley, and there was no way in hell I wanted to go to Berkeley. And I still maintain that was the best darn lucky decision I could have made. How it has influenced me. Richard mentioned people we met through the food service. Gee, I think we met through the food service. I met my best friend, and we've been best friends now for almost 50 years, working together along with the person that Richard showed in the apron, our friend Karen. We were the first 3 women to integrate the dish room at the food service. And it was a bond like no other. And what Richard pointed out about how it gave me the opportunity to interact with people I never would have met otherwise. I think for me, Santa Cruz gave me my voice. We were so young when we came there, and we didn't even know what a voice was. And it was through stumbling around and interacting with people and learning what you like that you learn how to speak in your own tones. I'm also, so many of my friends now are people that I met at that time. And I was incredibly fortunate. I was also apparently influential because I don't have kids of my own, but both of my 2 nephews attended Santa Cruz and graduated from Stevenson College. And my oldest nephew met his now wife, and they are working on the next 2 entries for the 3rd generation of Stevensonians. So I'm so happy that it was an incredibly fortunate, and it was a magical time there. I was there from 72 to 76, and those of us who were around then know that it was just magical, and we were forging a path and an experiment. And I wish that people were still so experimental, and I completely concur that we need to defend, protect, and support the higher education, freedom of speech, and blah, blah, blah. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. John, you are up next. John Pearson.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm glad to be here. I went to UC Santa Cruz in 1966. I graduated in 1970. I was a philosophy major. And people all my life have asked me, why did you major in philosophy? I thank God I did. And I thank God in a way I went to Santa Cruz, because the people there were two things: very smart and oddball. And I fit in very well. My roommates were ingenious people who lived their own lives and were their own person. I've done the same thing. I couldn't find what my career is, so I invented my career. I developed creative learning techniques and went all over the country for 35 years, worked with over 1 million kids in 1,000 schools and organizations. Did it on my own, and did it because I was a banana slug, because I said, I'm going to just make this stuff up as I go along. I'm going to give it everything I got. Right now, you can see some of my artwork behind me. I'm an artist, a writer, and a speaker. I've now developed a writing course called the Abracadabra Writing Course. It's off-road writing techniques to help you say unsayable things in unforgettable ways. I'll put it in the chat what I do if you want. But, I think the overall thing is it was a great place for people to be free and to people to be unique. I was the political cartoonist for 4 years on the newspaper, and every week they'd give me an issue and I had to dream up a cartoon. I became a cartoonist on the Oakland Tribune. I mean, it shaped who I was and who I've been. And during the time we had the Vietnam War, it was a tough, gutsy time with the civil rights and the civil and Vietnam. And it helped be around people who were smart and reverently irreverent. And I'm going to leave it at that. So God bless all of you banana slugs. May you be well. Thank you.
Hey, Eric, you are next.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I guess just to riff a bit off of what John said, I felt like I got so much of that as well. Not just coming out of Santa Cruz, but also living in the San Francisco Bay Area, that sense that you could be anything you wanted to do, no matter how weird it was. And the ethic was to be as creative and as unique as you possibly could be. I came there in 83. I left in 87. I was an art major, so that was, a little bit more in my area of what I was doing. But as far as the feeling of the impact of the school on my life and how I see it being kind of important to what's going on in society now, I feel my greatest gratitude is just that I got to spend that time, and also at my previous schooling, in an atmosphere of what we call liberal education, where viewpoints are invited, where intellectual conflict is given a place, and we have a chance to work out ideas in, a civil society format that is very American. I mean, I feel like it's a tradition that we find, in other societies, but we've perfected it as a part of American democracy. And so I feel like we all know the political phenomenon, both on the left and the right, that's happened in the last 10, 15 years to narrow those kinds of conversations. And I'm just grateful that there's enough of us that went through a pipeline that made us open and inclusive and perhaps settled in our brains and in emotions to have broader conversations that are inclusive of all voices. So yeah, that's my my spiel, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for sharing, Eric. Our next person up is Pete.
Hey, so I just have so much in harmony with what Eric just said, what John said, and with what Lisa said to begin with. The question about how did UCSC transform you, I just can't even begin to answer that question. I came to Cowell College in 1971 as a 17-year-old bumpkin from Turlock, California. And it just, it blew the top of my head off. And I, met so many wonderful people, had the privilege of studying with Paige Smith and John Tzikis, and and learning about the importance of history and the importance of ideas and how important ideas are in our culture and the power that they have to move things. And this notion that you have agency and that you can pick up and do things it was such a constant theme throughout my time at UCSC. I mean, it was, I was in school for a couple of years, then had to take a few years off and came back into the environmental studies program. And this was in 1977 by this point, but that it was very much the same sort of theme. You can make a difference in the world. And I guess I'll just finish by saying that there really is something special about UCSC students and UCSC graduates, and you know it when you talk to them, when you meet them, and it's a different outlook on life. And I just am so thankful that I had that.
Wonderful. Mara, you're up next.
I'm Mara Lopez. I got to Santa Cruz in 1980 and graduated in 82. I was a transfer student. I didn't fit in anywhere. I was a first generation high school graduate in my family, first generation, and now first generation college graduate. And Santa Cruz was the place I could fit in amongst this band of people who didn't fit in. And so it was a great place to find myself and express myself. I met just such phenomenal people, amazing professors, and dear friends who changed the trajectory of my life. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I went to College 5, not Porter. And my first choice was Cowell because I didn't know any different. Oh, and I decided to go there based just on the catalog. I was so glad you brought up the catalog. Like, I just had pictures and a little bit of text. And it was enough to convince me it was the place for me. And my parents came to graduation, which I had to beg them to come, and they were horrified that there were people blowing bubbles off the balcony in A dorm, and because I think they expected college to be ivy colored walls and lots of just order, and our graduation was anything but order. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing. We really appreciate it. Wanda, you are up next.
Hi, I'm a 77 Kresge graduate. It took me 6 years to graduate because I had to put myself through school. And I just feel like I was there at such a magical time. And thank God it was cheaper. And I did work study. And I was part of the 4th UCSC friendship delegation to China. So that had a big impact on my life. And we all met as a group, 18 of us, before we went to China. And I was like a photographer for that. And I also was a founding member of the Santa Cruz Women's Health Collective. And I just feel like I learned to get involved and do things and to make my voice be heard. So that was really important. And I'm dialing in from Richmond, Virginia. So it's a little later here.
Oh, we're so glad you made it, Wanda. That's wonderful. Okay, Benita, you are next.
Great, wonderful. I was a pioneer, and that was what I identify with. I still tell people that say I'm a banana slug. I said, first of all, I'm a pioneer. And it was in the 60s, I wanted to go to a place that was where I could be a part of the great transition, the social transformation going on. But I didn't want to go to UC Berkeley because I didn't want to get sucked into wanting to be in the sorority. And I was questioning with my father, where am I going to go to college? And he said, well, what does it matter? You're just going to find a husband. And I wrote my father off on that one. And the only place I applied was UC Santa Cruz. And I said to myself, if I don't get in, I'll go to a junior college until I can get in. And fortunately, I was part of the first class. I was in the trailers. I loved it. All of the great people from, Mary Holmes and Paige Smith and so many people. But I did transfer to Stevenson because of my interest more in social sciences than in the humanities. And I was there, for instance, I remember Herman Blake, the lesson that he taught me about how to motivate people to change. You don't scare them, you give them a carrot. You don't scare people about overpopulation. You tell them about how for instance, more children can go to college if there is not so many people or whatever else we need. And that lesson was so important to me. And after leaving, I really wanted to go and teach. I wanted to teach like transformative lessons. There's more story to that. I saw the first documentary on television, The Harvest of Shame, which had shaped me even more so from the beginning. And I wanted to teach that kind of social awakening that I had. And I had a independent study my junior year to teach in a junior high, and I wanted to teach The Harvest of Shame. And the teacher said, she was all for it, but that the parents said, no, I couldn't do it. It wasn't until 20 years later when I saw it on YouTube or wherever it was, that I realized really how impactful it was. That I can understand why parents didn't want their students to see it, but still, that was so important to me. And anyway, I wanted to teach afterwards. I had a mishap in the interview I had. When everyone else was going to teach in the inner city, I wanted to go back to Marin County, to the culturally deprived of Marin, and teach in the jail, the juvenile hall there. And but that didn't work out. So I picked up on my summer job in retail in Sausalito, which was an innovative place to be. And then got the opportunity to pioneer bringing the health food business and the natural food business out of the back streets and hippie culture of the United States, with a store on Union Square and eventually the first natural foods restaurant reviewed in Vogue magazine. And that was I was very proud of that. I could have gone on in that area, but what happened, we were supposed to transfer to Saks Fifth Avenue. Things didn't happen. My partner, first boss and then partner, decided he didn't want to go on. And we did end up with a hotel and restaurant in the wine and cheese country of Mexico for a year or so. And all these kind of pioneering things, what was really curious to me was what I was bringing to the business. And I'd had an incident at my store on Union Square where one of the customers came to me and said he couldn't figure out how the store was so well run without a hint of authoritarianism. And I thanked him. And as he went out the door, I had thought, well, I wonder if it has anything to do with my being a woman. And that's the pioneering direction I took afterwards. I decided I took a few jobs that were in the tech industry because that was where it was happening, because I wanted to see how my relational way of leading would produce results. And then did a lot of transformational education work with Landmark and some other organizations that had me really get into transformational education, and did an original research project at Sun Microsystems when it was one of the biggest tech companies in the country and in the world. And it was there that I started to distinguish the differences in identifying and putting language to what I call the relational competencies, that, for instance, that women are often more relational people, because they can be men, but more relational people are often more fire preventers and have a higher context way of seeing things. And we needed that language of fire preventer to show someone is contributing something different other than firefighting. And of course, I now parallel it to how we're listening to the indigenous people now for literally preventing fires, because they have a more relational, high context way of seeing things. And now, and for the last 25 years, I've been teaching in the graduate engineering program at Santa Clara University, a course called Gender and Engineering, about how to collaborate with different mindsets and different competencies, particularly having identified all these relational competencies. And all this is pioneering. All of it is pioneering. And I wouldn't do anything else. And I at one point I said to myself, am I going to do this gender work, or am I going to take up on an offer? I could have been I could have gone into
Benita, I'm going to jump in.
yeah.
I'm sorry. We got to move on so that everyone has a chance to share.
Okay.
Thank you so much for
Thanks.
sharing your story with us. Corey, you're up next.
Thanks. I came to Santa Cruz as a student, having grown up in Minnesota and never having seen the ocean before. So needless to say, there were mind-blowing experiences from day one. Two of the aspects that I was the most thrilled by, of course, were no grades and high academics, which I can't think of anywhere else I could have gotten that. But in particular, I want to call attention to the 6 week or whatever the limit was, where you would go to all these classes the first few weeks, and then at the end of the third week, maybe they'd say, who's in? And then you give you the class card. And I don't know if other people did this, but I took all kinds of classes that I had no intention of really taking for longer than those 3 weeks, because it was like a survey world that you could do anything you want. And the most blatant example, which I do bring up regularly today, is I sat in for 3 weeks on a history of consciousness class, and two of my colleagues, fellow students, were Huey Newton and Angela Davis. So where else could you get that kind of experience? Anyway, it was an awesome time. I did struggle with out-of-state tuition, even in those small numbers back then. So it did take me 5 years. But because of that, I got to be a part of the 6th delegation to China, along with CL, who's on this call, who I haven't seen in 50 years. So thanks for all this. It was great.
Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken yet who'd like to speak?
Okay, I got one more.
Go for it.
I was in the dorms the year that Patty Hearst was kidnapped and went through all that insanity. And this is a true story. The day that the shootout in LA happened with the Symbionese Liberation Army, and everybody thought maybe she had been killed in that burning house, at Stevenson dorm in the food service that night, probably pre-planned, but I would love to think it wasn't. On the menu that day was patty melts.
That's kind of hysterical. Anyone else?
So while some of you are still deciding, oh, John, do you want to say something else?
Yeah. Briefly, first of all, it's been a joy being here. I want to say that, and I too am a pioneer because I started in '66 and graduated in '70. I think the difference between UC Santa Cruz and other places, to me, may be the difference between success and fulfillment. There are a lot of ways to be successful and miserable, but if you want to be fulfilled, you got to do what you love. And to do that, you got to know who you are, and you got to be able to break some rules. And by breaking rules, I mean go to a place where, as has been pointed out, people are very intelligent and their own person. And a quick thing, I met Reagan in the Cowell bathroom once. He was having a regent's meeting and whatnot, and I went in there and I looked under the stall, and there were some very fancy Italian shoes. I thought, could that possibly be our governor? Then I waited. He appeared, lo and behold, and we're in a thing that's the size of a phone booth. And I said, at the time, excuse me, Governor, you might not want to wash your hands because of budget cuts and whatnot. We don't have any paper in the dispenser. And then he said, where was that shaggy dog that was in there? He was a very funny guy, and he really made you feel like you were. I disagreed with him completely, but I will never forget meeting, Reagan in a phone booth at UC Santa Cruz, Cowell College. So, hey, bless all of you. Keep being and doing what you are.
Thank you for sharing. We love these amazing stories. Marco, you're up next.
I attended Cowell. I graduated in '82, and I've been teaching at Porter since the year 2000. It's not the same university we went to. The focus has changed dramatically. Sometimes I feel that we are not educating anymore, that we are processing. Part of the reason is because there are so many students that get accepted every year. At Porter, we accept between 400 and 500 students every fall. People are sleeping in the dorms are sleeping in triples and quadruples. There's no more singles, no more doubles. The thing that I learned at Cowell College, I had great teachers at Cowell. My mentor was John DeSikas, but I also worked with Audrey Stanley, Gabe Burns, Tom Lair, many, many others. And the thing that I learned from, interacting with these great people was that you come to college for three reasons. You come to college to, first of all, meet the friends you'll have for life. Secondly, you come to college to learn how to learn on your own. And the third reason you come to college is you come to college to find yourself. And those three things I learned from attending UC Santa Cruz, specifically Cowell College. I mean, Cowell College has a wonderful motto, in pursuit of excellence in the company of friends. And that sort of defined my life in many, many ways. I worked in theater and also in film. And, collaboration is very important. I try to teach my students that. I always begin by telling them that the three reasons why they are there should be, like I said, finding who you are, learning how to learn on your own, and making the friends you'll have for life. One last thing. I wish the risk management office didn't exist because it really changed the nature of the university. One of the things that I did a lot of theater at Cowell, and I remember putting on a production of Agamemnon in the courtyard by the gallery, and I had people climbing on the roofs. I mean, 3 scenes were done on the roofs. I remember the woman who played Clytemnestra was a teacher, a French teacher, Patty Fitchen. And I remember watching her every night climbing up those stairs to get on the roof so she could do the final scene. They would literally arrest me for doing something like that now. I mean, the fact that all the rooms, all the spaces are closed after 9 o'clock until the next morning because they don't want to pay insurance, that's when I rehearsed. That's when I made use of the spaces that I needed in order to grow as a theater artist. And all of that is denied to the students now because of risk management. They control everything. So it's not the same place, but the memories that I have and the love and affection that I hold for the place and what it did for me, it always be with me. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you for sharing. If anyone else wants to speak aloud, feel free to raise your hand. While we're waiting to see if anyone else wants to share, I can read off a couple of things that you've put into the chat. So Sandra was honored to have Ernesto Galarza as a group professor in 1976, which inspired her involvement in farm labor organizing and strengthened her bilingual education skills. That's amazing. And she works in bilingual psychotherapy. She DJ'd in a Latin American music program on KZSC. Sounds like an amazing experience. Thank you for sharing. Lisa says that for their graduation, it was in the lower quad at Stevenson, and she was the graduation speaker. Awesome. And someone else said, Wanda, Kresge's 77 graduation, you all passed around a conch shell and shared about what you learned. So many fun things. So if you want to share, feel free to drop it in the chat. We still have a couple minutes if you want to raise your hand. So maybe we'll give it a few minutes, and if we're all tapped out, we'll have
No,
California. But yeah, Pete, go ahead.
Well, actually, I have a question for Richard, and it's something that he and I have talked about because we talked about all the time anyway. But you have the perspective of having been at UCSC for over 50 years now, on and off, and in a lot of different ways, and even very recently. And I'd be interested in your thoughts about how it has changed, because I thought Marco's comment was right. It's very, very different. My perception of it is than it was when I was there in the 1970s. So say a few words about that.
So I'm going to try and be succinct. So I made the comment earlier that being on campus these days, I feel a little bit schizophrenic. There's the part of me that was there primarily in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as almost everyone who's spoken was there before 1990, it sounds like. So the thing that is most difficult for me to deal with in teaching Cal Core Course sections is how many students think that a STEM major is the only reasonable choice for them to make. And I see a face on here who's a Mesa STEM program director, and I have enormous respect for students who love the sciences, but often it feels like so many students are choosing that major because they think that they can't choose something in the humanities or the social sciences, that those aren't practical. And I guess I believe really passionately that what students most importantly learn in their undergraduate education is not the content of what faculty are talking about, but the skills that they acquire along the way. So you learn to read and write and articulate your thoughts and interact with somebody whose thoughts are very different than yours. And those skills are applicable in almost any grown-up environment. Um, so I think students are unnecessarily choosing a narrower set of pathways than they need to in terms of what kind of education can carry them somewhere worth going in their adult life. I guess the other thing I have to say though is most of my student I view, so part of my student I view is a Cal Core course, and those students are the same hot mess that they have been for 60 years. Mom and dad dropped them off. So here's a little story. So typically in the first couple of weeks in the quarter, I ask students to come see me for about 20 minutes. I hand around a clipboard, they know when to come. And a student who lived in Parrington came a year ago and said, well, that weekend was really interesting because of the incident. And nobody ever told me what the incident was, but it sounded very much like somebody had way too much to drink, went into the bathroom hoping to find their way to a toilet, but didn't make it quite all the way and left some big mess that somebody had to clean up. Anybody who lived on campus has memories of that moment, and I don't think they've changed in 60 years. Um, my comment to the student was, that will go away. So this is like the first weekend after parents have gone. So that will go away because students will have books to read and papers to write, and they won't have to be that dissolute. But also, a lot of people will wake up. A lot of people woke up Sunday morning with hangovers they don't ever want to have again, and so your parents drop you off, and you kind of find your way into the adulthood that you manage that isn't managed for you, and there are bumps along the way, but we all at some point become grown-ups. um, I do think narrative evaluations change everything. When my son, who I have not named and wishes not to be named, was going off to Santa Cruz, Cindy, my wife, and my wife is a Merrill alumna, said, in many ways, I mean, we hope that you have a wonderful education. If you are the instructor teaching and you don't have to think about the difference between an A minus and a B plus, you interact with the classroom completely differently. And if as a student, you're not worried about, I need those 3 more points to get over the next grade threshold. Um, it makes a profound difference. And so there are many UCSCs. In my view, probably the most important transition was the one when narratives went away and letter grades became the default proxy. On the other hand, I mean, I have a couple of students who I know through the Smith Society. One's a lit major, one's a history major. The one who's a history major took her senior seminar this quarter and wrote a 25-page research essay on events that impacted the gay community, LGBTQ community in Long Beach in the 19 teens. And I see in her the same kind of passion to learn and explore and figure out things that I think I've seen in students who are my peers as an undergraduate, a graduate student, et cetera. So I think Marco's right, and Santa Cruz is very different, but I think it still attracts students who care about their education. And one person who's been mentioned numerous times this evening, that I know, Pete, that you will, I'll say the name and you'll smile. In Very Late in Seeds of Something Different, John DeZekis makes the comment that Santa Cruz is not the experimental, weird, eccentric hippie college it once was. He doesn't put it in that language, but he says many of the things that made Santa Cruz different, those differences are gone. But it is still a university community where people who want to get an education will find faculty who are anxious to mentor, guide, teach them. And I think there's I mean, I hope Marco experiences in his Porter students, lots of students who aren't entirely so good. I'm glad to see that thumbs up. They're not quite sure what they're there to learn, but they know that getting an education, it can be transformative. And they kind of, like a person with a cane, a blind person, they want to find their way to that path for themselves.
Can I respond? One thing that John DeSicas did for me is he always gave me enough rope for me to hang myself. He never said no to me. And so I was able to really push the envelope as far as I could. And that's exactly what I do for my students. John DeSicas was my model as a teacher. And I owe him so much. I mean, I had a friendship with him until basically the day he died. And I miss him terribly. But the man changed my life in profound ways. And I try to continue, his philosophy of teaching and how one has the opportunity to shape the lives of all these young people. And it's a privilege and an honor. So yeah, John was very important.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Marco. I think we have time for one more. So David, would you like to, there we go.
Yeah, I was thinking about sort of magic moments from campus. I was a soccer player well before Banana Slugs were official. We were absolutely diehard Banana Slugs. And I do remember practicing soccer, shooting the ball towards the goal on that east field, watching it float off into the sunset, and my mind drift away from soccer completely into the colors. Many times when we would also sit on the College Five right by that wonderful IUD and look out over the sunset. Other events, college was very important to me. I was at Oaks. We did not have Oaks at that time, so I was in College 5, but J. Herman Blake was there to guide us, and he would create amazing events. We spent a whole day with Alex Haley before his book Roots came out. Incredible experience. College was very important to me. I took probably half of my classes in the college system as opposed to the department system. And so I guess I'm going to use that as a segue, Richard, to ask you, how has that changed? I have a feeling that the college is not what it once was.
So this is the perfect question for my observation that I'm in a place that's very familiar and very different. I had been back at Cowell a couple of years before I realized that faculty are not affiliated with colleges anymore. So for people who were there in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, Most of the faculty offices in the colleges were occupied by ladder tenure track faculty who you could go and ask questions or interact with. Over time, the campus opened various large buildings that are well, the buildings are divisional and the departments are there. So if you want to see history faculty these days, you go to the humanities building, which is where the Cowell C lot used to be. And once students finish their core course section, there's almost no academic cast to what happens in the colleges. So the great thing about colleges is it kind of made that faculty and students would bump into each other, trip over each other, whether it was at the Stevenson Coffee Shop or Banana Joe's or the college. I mean, everybody wants coffee, and so they're all standing in line, and it's just easy to. Those kind of interactions were spontaneous and easy, and you could say, I'm really interested in whatever it was, and the faculty would take you seriously and say, well, have you read this? Or you should take this class, or come see me during my office hours. So that's different. But I'm going to go back to my student who's just done this history paper on the LGBT community in Long Beach a century ago. The faculty member has been responsive to her interests, her work, has guided her, I think, in many of the ways that Marco described John DeZekis, at least as she's described the relationship to me. So the place is more conventional, and there are still faculty who are deeply committed to teaching in their discipline and transforming the lives of the people who take their classes. There was a name on screen for which the camera was never on. I'm scanning the screen and I'm not seeing the name now. But for most of the evening, there was a little gray box that said Domhoff. And I'm pretty confident that was probably Bill Domhoff, who was one of Santa Cruz's most nationally distinguished faculty, a lot for his work following up C. Wright Mills on power elite political theory. Bill retired as part of a golden handshake in the mid 90s and did a complete pivot to doing research on dreams and what dreams say to, what dreams mean. And there was an alumni. So I think most of you know that there's an alumni weekend in late April, and Bill was a speaker at one a couple of years ago and has all the energy that I saw in him in the 90s and that I suspect he had in the 60s and 70s. So there's still people around for whom the life of the mind is a source of enormous energy. Most of them are newer than Bill Domhoff for obvious reasons. But I think there's still, so I'm repeating myself. So it's not the same place that it was, but it's a place that somebody who wants to be passionate about intellectual things, that's not hard to have that happen.
Richard, I think that's the perfect place for us to end it tonight. Let's have a huge round of applause for Richard. Thank you for leading us in such a great and interactive discussion tonight. This was a really interesting and fun change from our normal lectures, and I think that everybody really enjoyed it. As Richard spoke about earlier, please consider supporting the Smith Society, and I think we're going to drop a link to that in the chat box. Thank you, Shayna. We would also like to give our thanks to the staff from the Alumni Engagement and University Events offices who helped organize this event. Thank you, Shayna, Diana, and Paulina. Our next event will be on Monday, January 12th. The speaker will be Dr. Marco Rolandi, who will be speaking about merging bioelectronics and ML for optimized wound healing. So a bit of a departure from what we are talking about tonight. But we do hope you'll join us. Keep an eye on your inbox for invites to that for January. And a few other upcoming events that might interest you. There is a public lecture on Thursday, December 11th called The End Game, Discovering How Telomeres Create or Cause Disease. And that's Dr. Carol Greeter. And she'll be discussing her work on telomeres, which are the end of our chromosomes. Saturday, December 13th is a Boston Bee Slugs holiday party. So if you happen to be in the Boston area, there will be a UCSC meetup there on Saturday the 13th. And then, of course, Sunday, December 14th, as Richard spoke about earlier, is the Central Coast Slug meetup. So please go hang out with Richard. You can continue the conversations that we had here tonight. And then in the new year, Tuesday, January 6th, is a community day at the Arboretum. So start the new year with some fresh air out at the UCSC Arboretum Community Day. It's free admission and a beautiful way to start your new year. And on behalf of the UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association, thank you so much for joining us. And please come back in the new year on January 12th at 6:30 p.m. for our next Slugs and Steins event. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.